afternoon, all. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to the discussions with my fellow panelists. I'm sharing my screen here. Hope that looks okay. I am pleased to talk today about a specific case that came to mind when we thought about social sciences and that role, potential or actual, in doing particularly poor or good management of this problem. I want to point out my co-authors, Sarah Mesnick. Dr. Mesnick is at the Southwest Fisheries Science Center in La Jolla, National Marine Fisheries Service, and has been working on vaquita for a long time. Sarah is also one of the few biologists who feels comfortable working in the realm of economics. So thank you, Sarah. I just need to advance my slides. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about vaquita and its threat. It's a singular threat, and I think you can see from the photo what that is. Touch on the fishing communities, which in the end became the most important part of this problem, of this challenge. Go through the sad history of failed policies, well-intentioned, and then touch on the accelerated decline because of the vaquita, because of trafficking and the merging with the drug cartels and crime. And then touch a little bit on the role and timing of socioeconomic approaches and the outlook. So the vaquita was first described in 1958. At the time it was being described and studied by scientists, it was already in decline. So it was described and pretty much documented around the time I went into kindergarten. And here I am towards the end of my career, and this species is almost gone. So it is a very sad and swift story of decline. Vaquita is the world's smallest porpoise. It is found only in the upper Gulf of California. It's also the most endangered marine mammal in the world. In this map, you can see the upper Gulf of California between Baja California and the mainland of Mexico. This is the only place where vaquita are found. They've been isolated and evolved on their own. And so very much a part of the heritage, the rich heritage of the biodiversity of Mexico. I understand Mexico is number 3 in the world in biodiversity. And it's an area characterized by traditional fisheries, small boats called pangas, working with gill nets. Gill nets are very much the go-to gear type in small-scale coastal communities around the world. And unfortunately, because of their location and the way they're used, they are associated with a high rate of bycatch of protected species. This graph is as difficult to read as it is painful to read, but it's basically throughout the years, and this is in an article that Sarah and I recently published with a number of co-authors. Throughout the years, you can see many, many programs, Mexican programs in collaboration with other governments and NGOs. A lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of creativity applied to saving the vaquita, but it didn't stop it. And in fact, the decline of the vaquita accelerated, as you can see at this inflection point, with the introduction of the illegal trade of totuaba swim bladders. We're going to go through some of those policies here in a second. The totuaba is a large croaker, and it has been endangered for some time. I believe it was the first finfish listed on CITES Appendix 1. When it started coming back in the stocks rebuilding, even though they were still prohibited, the gillnet fishery switched to totuaba. And it was possible to see on the beach all these carcasses of totuaba with a big cut in their stomach, this beautiful fish meat left on the beach to rot, because the swim bladder is what fetches up to 5,000 or more per swim bladder, as you see on the left. Those are dried and sold on the Asian market. They're associated with nutritional, special nutritional properties, especially for new mothers, even though that's not necessarily the case. And more recently, they've been associated with wealth storage. So when you're in communities where there might not be a traditional banking or institutional banking, this would be a way to store wealth. So it added fuel to the fire. It also, unfortunately, got merged into the drug trade, which is a big part of the that part of Mexico, driven by demand, in case of drugs, demand from the US, in the case of and other countries, and in the case of Totoaba swim bladders, primarily the Asian market. So ironically, it was recommended very early on that socioeconomics be a part of the solution to the decline of the vaquita, to support vaquita-safe fisheries and try to find viable alternative livelihoods. And it was clear and it was recognized by the Presidential Commission called SERVA that successful conservation was going to depend on well-managed fisheries that support, and importantly, that are supported by the local communities. That never happened. Let me run through some of these policies that were applied but not successful. There were permit buyouts. These were voluntary, but they didn't work because there was really no cap on the total number of permits. People would take the money from those permits, turn around and buy some more permits or add more capital to their fishing vessels so that they could engage in capital stuffing and maybe even conduct more illegal fishing. There was a compensation program for closed areas, sort of a payments for ecosystem services, but those payments were very unequally distributed. They went primarily to boat owners, with less payments going to hired captains or crew. So they didn't have any capital with which to turn around and start another economic activity. So they turned to illegal fishing, and in fact, could make quite a bit of money from illegal fishing. All kinds of alternative gear were developed, as you can see here in this diagram. Some of that was right within the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Panama Lab. But the problem was it was very difficult to get that out there on the water in the upper Gulf of California. It was necessary to get experimental fishing permits. That's difficult even in the US. In Mexico, it was even harder. It was difficult to find fishermen who were willing to basically stick their necks out because it was a little bit of a dangerous activity to sort of seen as collaborating with those trying to find a solution and to test it. And even when they got out on the water, it was hard to test the gear because there was so much illegal gill nets in the water, just basically blocking their ability physically to test the nets. So even though some of these nets showed promise, it wasn't necessarily possible to expand them. And as far as alternative livelihoods are concerned, these are communities that for generations have been in the fisheries. Non-malleable human capital is what economists call it. It's just very difficult to switch overnight to being a tour guide or working in renewable energy or aquaculture. So what was critically missing such that these policies didn't really work? Well, in addition to a lack of a decent system of fishery management, it was really important to do some early investment in the community engagement and get buy-in on what these programs were designed to do. You know, build that awareness, that trust, and that interest in vaquita as part of the national heritage. These are things that take a long time, and you have to start very early. But also with just the basic socioeconomic analysis of the fishery and of the community. What are the costs and revenues for a typical fisherman? What are the major costs? And if you're switching gear, what is that adding cost to fuel? What happens to your profit margin? And also within the community, what's the share of fishing in the overall economy? What are some of the other sectors? And if you had a better picture of the socioeconomics of the individual fishing fleet, then maybe you could think about incentivizing approaches. These shrimp are beautiful products. They're big shrimp and they can fetch a pretty good price on the Southern California market. Sarah was working with some of the star chefs in Southern California who would feature these shrimp. And the idea was to try to get some of these fishermen using alternative gear to get their product into a box and to the market in Southern California with a vaquita-friendly label on it. And if you could get that higher price, would that offset the lower yield, which would be expected, or higher costs, or both, from an alternative gear? Fishermen are using gill nets because that's the easiest way to fish. And also just really looking at viable solutions beyond the fishery, what's really available. So as far as an outlook, this is probably one of the most well-documented declines in a species, and we hope not, but it seems inevitable extinction. But there's a lot of lessons we can learn and continue to work, even in the upper Gulf of California. How can we get a better engagement with the fishing community, a better living from fishing and other types of activities? And also there are other megafauna that need to be protected in the upper Gulf. We've learned a lot. How could we take that to other fisheries, gillnet fisheries around the world? At the International Whaling Commission, under the Bycatch Mitigation Initiative, we're looking at these coastal small-scale fisheries that use gillnets, saying, what could we do differently? Can we deploy the nets differently? Can we use pingers? Can we have time area closures? What have we learned from the case of the vaquita? I think the one thing we've really learned is you have to start with the fishing community and have a really good profile and work with those fishing communities to get the buy-in. The vaquita has also taught us about the growing role of organized crime and trafficking in wildlife trade. It's not just bear claws and tiger skins. Now it's totoaba swim bladders and this type of thing. So we're learning a lot from that. And with that, Rich, thank you very much. And thanks to the whole panel. I'm looking forward to the next talks.